I mean, just think about the fact that the fundamental and most inspiring myth of their religion uh, is the story of the betrayal, the torture, and the gruesome murder of the most righteous man on earth. You know, the crucifixion story, and that his supposed willingness to be slaughtered, his willingness to be sacrificed in surrender to the evil of his enemies, somehow redeemed his enemies, allowing their evil to run amok, run rampant, and have its way in the world, to the point that the most perfect human being got sadistically murdered. And by his murder, supposedly, the doors of salvation opened up to anyone who believed that he went along with all of that voluntarily, that he didn't resist it, that he didn't oppose it. You know, he didn't so much as raise his voice in rebuke at the injustice. I mean, you can't help but see how this myth has guided or misguided them for centuries, for millennia, in fact, right up until today, and the genocide in Gaza. Their most deeply embedded mythology teaches them that the role and the function of the good and the righteous is to be viciously slaughtered, and that by some perverse process, this saves them somehow, saves the ones who slaughter them. Well, I mean, who would reward you for slaughtering the righteous? Who would have ever put that in your mind, that slaughtering the innocent and slaughtering the good was somehow redemptive? I mean, who would have made you think that? This is a serious and really tragic problem for the West, for the ideological and philosophical progeny of Europe, because it's literally coded by now into their moral and intellectual DNA. It's a foundational, fundamental, paradigmatic element in their so-called civilization. And it's crucial to understand this. Look, the whole nature, in reality, the whole nature of the struggle of the human condition is the children of Adam, alayhi salam, trying to prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right in honoring Adam, alayhi salam. And the other side of that struggle is Iblis trying to prove that he was right in refusing to honor Adam, alayhi salam. This is Shaitan's stubborn, arrogant, and desperate mission from then until now. Until now, he wants to justify and he wants to exonerate himself for his refusal to make sajda when he was ordered to do so, and to prove that he was rational and that his rationale for that was correct. He's determined to prove that human beings are unworthy, inferior, ungrateful, disobedient, and dishonorable. So therefore, he can't tolerate goodness and righteousness. He can't tolerate obedience and piety and decency in people. He can't tolerate those kind of people existing. Those people must be punished. They must be discredited. They must be persecuted and hated and exterminated. This is the theme of the battle that we're in our life, and it always has been. And Iblis has contrived all manner of ways to accomplish this. And one of the most effective ways that he's used was precisely this twisted concept that I mentioned, where the good and the innocent must be sacrificed. And of course, that goodness ceases to be goodness the moment that goodness moves to defend itself. You see that very clearly in Gaza, in the attitude towards Gaza, because it is impossible morally to blame the Palestinians in any way whatsoever, unless you fundamentally believe that the innocent are somehow obliged to not defend themselves and to not resist evil. You have to believe that the good and the innocent are morally required to submit to their own slaughter, just like your myth about Nabi Isa alayhi salam, your myth about Jesus. And if they refuse to succumb to evil, to succumb to oppression and aggression and transgression, then this somehow compromises their goodness and their innocence. Makes no sense at all. It's obviously, this is insane. That's sadism, not morality. But it's completely in line with the agenda of Iblis, with the agenda of Shaitan. You see, you can never actually properly understand geopolitics, power dynamics, current affairs, and so forth. You can't analyze any of that accurately if you exclude from your analysis the overarching truth that is conveyed in the Quran and Sunnah, in Islam. You know, this is just another trick of Shaitan, making people think that excluding Islamic understanding constitutes objectivity and impartiality. No, this fatally impairs your ability to recognize and understand what actually goes on in the world. But this, again, is the brilliance of Shaitan in fabricating false religions back in the day. The long-term utility of corrupting the message of the prophets and writing in your own words your own rules and claiming that those are from God, claiming that that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because those will eventually be proved false. They'll be proved to be forgeries, and thereby Iblis can sow cynicism and doubt about religion itself and about the prophets and about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, until people think that no religious text is authentic just because they were exposed to fraudulent texts. It's like someone who's been swindled by a con man into paying for a property that doesn't exist. So then they think that no properties exist. It's irrational. But you know, once bitten, twice shy. And of course, this mindset, this mentality, this really deep animosity towards the good and towards the innocent, and this idea that the role of righteous and pious people is to suffer and be slaughtered. Of course, this idea, this concept predates Christianity's spread in Europe. Obviously, they in Europe have the tradition of sacrificing whoever in the society is deemed to be pure, you know, virgins and so on. And there's an abundance of such things in their pre-Christian myths, their pagan myths. And I would argue that the source of this perverse idea has always been the same source, and that's Shaitan. All they did, or all he did, was to Christianize what was essentially his hatred for goodness and decency. His hatred, Shaitan's hatred, for upright conduct and morality, which he then translated for them into this concept of redemptive suffering, redemptive sacrifice. Even though his only real interest is the elimination of the righteous, the elimination of righteousness. But you see how this concept runs through their veins, ideologically, philosophically, morally. And then you can see how that manifests in policy. So I'm telling you, you can't separate these things if you care at all about understanding the world accurately, or if you care about understanding the West accurately. You can't do analysis without understanding this. Not proper analysis. They think that their sins are someone else's responsibility. This is foundational for them. And more precisely, that their sins are the responsibility, not just of someone else, but someone else who is sinless, or who is good, or who's moral. The moral are to be redemptively slaughtered by the immoral, and somehow that makes the immoral moral. This is the root, and policies are the branches of their foundational moral confusion. As I said, it's tragic. It's truly tragic, because of course, like anyone else, you have Westerners, non-Muslims, who genuinely want to be moral, who genuinely want to be good, sincerely want that, because that's human nature. That's your fitra. But it's just like those, have you seen those watermelons that they grow in Japan, that they grow them in cages or in boxes so that they unnaturally grow into a square shape, just so that they'll be more easy to, you know, organize on the shelves? It's bizarre. And so in the West, it's the same. You grow them in a whole architecture of philosophical and cultural restrictions that deforms their moral sense. And I'm telling you, you know, you have all of these movements in the West for a return to traditional values and so forth. That's not a solution. That's not going to solve your problem. You are where you are today because this is the only place that your past could ever have led you. The only place that your so-called traditional values could have ever led you. So if you try to revive your Christian past, you'll just be on a loop. Corrupt and confused values, and then a corrupt and confused rejection of those values, and then back again over and over and over. And that's basically the moral history of the West. That's what's been going on for 2,000 years. Which is why no one in the world agrees with you that you have developed or evolved or changed meaningfully in 2,000 years, because you haven't. They're like the hands on a clock. As time passes, you just go in circles. Yes, time is passing, but you're not going anywhere. You don't have anything on your bookshelves that can guide you, frankly. You need to try a different bookshelf. You need to try a different library, because all your Western reference manuals will just keep you in that same box of moral incoherence. And no, this doesn't only play out in, say, Western foreign policy, colonization, invasion, occupation, exploitation, brutality, pillage and plunder. This unspoken, unacknowledged, but constantly acted upon hatred for goodness and innocence manifests in many, many ways, not just in, it's not only playing out in Gaza or in Congo or in the global south, in all of the countries that you've ransacked over the centuries, but you're actually slaughtering the goodness of your own people. So it manifests in your own country, it plays out in your own countries. But you're doing it through the ideological word game of freedom and individuality. Because again, everyone in the world can see what you really mean by those terms, by freedom and individuality. You mean license and immorality and amorality and hedonism and heedlessness, impiety and perversion, and basically the murder of any higher purpose in life besides carnal and material self-indulgence. Freedom of this and freedom of that all comes down to basically freedom from moral accountability, which is exactly the same thing as what your ancestors believed in through the mechanism of sacrifice. And is exactly what is the core doctrine of Western Christianity, except that they believe in it through the mechanism of the myth of the torture and crucifixion of Jesus, Nabi Isa alayhi salam. The right to sin, the right to do evil, being paid for by the persecution of the righteous, or in the modern age, the persecution of the very concept of righteousness. Jesus didn't tell you about freedom. Jesus told you about righteousness, which is almost the exact opposite of freedom if you think about it. Righteousness requires strict discipline. It requires strict restraint or constraints on freedom. But you've made freedom your highest value, which, as I've said before, is exactly like the Satanists, with their single solitary commandment of do as thou wilt. That's your religion, whether you want to admit it or not. And whether you want to admit it or not, it's catastrophic to righteousness, to your own righteousness. And of course, it's just a word game anyway, because none of you are actually free in reality. You're not free in your daily life, and you're not free in your conscience. And this is obvious from the avalanche, the avalanche of mental, emotional, and psychological conditions that's burying your whole society. The people of the West need to be liberated. There's no question about that. Wallahi, there needs to be a liberation struggle in the West, but you and I both know that even if they had some form of a liberation struggle in the West, the only form that that's actually going to take, or that it's likely to ever take, is just a superficial struggle against the ruling elite. And even that is unlikely, in my opinion. But even if they did do that, it wouldn't solve their problem. It's not going to cure your illness. Like I said, it would just be part of the same cycle that they always go through, that they've been going through for hundreds and hundreds of years, leading up to no meaningful improvement. Their revolutions never lead to evolution. And fighting the powers that be would be the same. It'd be the same result. There'd be no positive outcome. No, they need moral liberation. Liberation from the moral chaos and confusion. They need to escape that box, that very Western box of moral chaos. You know that story about Pandoras box? Well, that's the box that they live in. A mental and moral container of chaos and confusion and sickness. This is why they literally cannot understand anything outside of their own experience and their own history. Because mentally they're in a box, Culturally, they're in a box. Psychologically, they think that their history, for example, with a fabricated religion that was only ever used to control people, they think that that means that all religions are like that. They think that whatever experience they have had must be universally applicable. Whatever applies to them applies to everyone. That's what I mean. Their so-called freedom is a farce. They're the most controlled, the most closed, the most narrow-minded, and the most dogmatic people on earth. Not to mention the most miserable, the most neurotic, the most depressed, the most suicidal, the most cynical, and the most hopeless people on earth. I've said it many times. Your civilization has betrayed you. It's let you down. Your so-called civilization is victimizing you and has been victimizing you for centuries. Never mind how much it has victimized innocent people, good people all around the world for centuries. Never mind that. Never mind the fact that it has been at war with righteous people for centuries. Never mind how it has sabotaged and attacked genuinely sophisticated, genuinely evolved, and genuinely civilized societies for centuries. Never mind all of that. But just look at what it has done to you yourselves. Because for us, in the Muslim world, in the global south, we've already collectively had enough of you. You know, no one in the global south or in the Muslim world is holding their breath anymore, waiting for you to correct yourselves. You know, we held out for a long time. Granted, that patience, to some degree, was by necessity because we were your hostages. So all we could do was hope that you would rehabilitate yourselves. But now, I don't think anyone even believes that you can. I don't think anyone believes that you can correct yourselves or can be rehabilitated, and I don't think you can either. Not with the ingredients that you have in your pantry. No, those ingredients can only make one dish. And that's the dish that you've been forcing down our throats for all these years. Tyranny and violence and oppression and hypocrisy and white supremacy, racism, colonization, and what have you. Amorality, immorality, ruthless evil, greed. You know, you only have in your culture, in your heritage, in your warehouse of ideas and philosophies, you only have the ingredients to make exactly what you already are right now. So like I said, you're going to have to look elsewhere if you really want to change. If you ever want to truly civilize, you're going to have to look elsewhere for some ideas. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying that you can't do it with the parts that you have right now. You know, it's like if you buy a couch from IKEA, and then when you get the box home, and you open up the box, you find that there's only some toothpicks and masking tape inside the box. You can't make a couch with that. It's not going to work. I mean, you could make something with it and call it a couch, but it's not going to be that. So no, as much as non-Muslims dislike it, I'm always going to analyze geopolitics informed by Islam. Because wallahi, trying to analyze the world without this guidance is never going to lead to any sort of coherent understanding, any accurate understanding. And that includes understanding the undeniable role of shaitan, of Iblis, in Western history, in Western culture, in Western religion, ideology, and then in behavior and in policy. So if you want me to abandon that framework, that religious framework for understanding things, then I know that it's only because you want me to be less accurate in my analysis. And we all know why you would want that.